Welcome back to The Real News, part two of our discussion about CETA, the European Union and Canadian Comprehensive Economic Trade Agreement. We still have Jean Blaylock on the line from Global Trade Now, and Jean is explaining to us a lot of the complex nuances about this trade agreement. Well, Jean, explain to us, how does CETA compare or relate to other trade agreements, as you mentioned, the Trade and Services Agreement, TISA, and the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, TTIP, and the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, and NAFTA, all these trade agreements that have been enthusiastically embraced by government leaders at the time, but have yet to bear out the promised benefits for workers and citizens as time was able to pass along from when these original agreements passed?
CETA is really quite similar to TTIP, which is the trade deal that had been negotiated between the US and the European Union. There are differences between them, largely to some extent because of the differences between the US's interests and Canada's interests. For instance, TTIP would have pushed much harder on health services in the UK because the US doesn't have the same kind of health system that both Canada and most of the European Union countries share in the approach to public health services. But other than that, they're both trade deals that, as I said, are no longer so much about trade. They are about deregulation, privatization, and introducing corporate courts. These courts which allow foreign companies to sue governments outside of the national legal system over any changes in laws that companies feel would be against their interests. NAFTA, of course, is the grandfather of all of the trade deals and is the one where people can see the results in the longest term. The fact that on the whole, it has not benefited the ordinary people in any of the countries involved, but it has led to increased levels of inequality and it has led to increased power for corporations.
So what are you calling for now, and can CETA still be stopped?
CETA can be stopped. We are a week away from a vote in the European Parliament. If the European Parliament does not give its agreement to the deal, then it will be stopped. And the vote there is on a knife edge at the moment, really. It's encouraging the number of MEPs within the Parliament who are listening to people and who are taking seriously the concerns, because in the past trade deals have tended just to go through very easily. This one is actually being looked at. It's going through the process that it ought to be going through. The MEPs, as a result of the number of people who have been writing to them, who have been emailing them, who have been tweeting them, who have been even picking up the phone and trying to call their offices, are actually looking at what the impacts of CETA would be and are considering whether they really think that it should be approved. Although the Trade Committee in Parliament, as you mentioned, has recommended support for CETA, the Environment Committee had a big debate around it, and the Employment Committee voted against CETA. The Employment Committee said that it would be bad for jobs in the European Union, and they recommended that the Parliament should reject CETA. It's good that these issues are being taken seriously, that they are being debated properly, that people are looking at really getting into the detail and trying to understand what the effects would be. And we are still just hoping that enough of the MEPs will look at what the issues are and will vote against CETA. Even after that, if that vote is lost within the European Parliament, CETA still has to be approved by all of the member states within the European Union and by Canada. So it's being considered by the Canadian Parliament at the moment. And if the European Parliament vote is lost and CETA goes through, then it will go to all of the European Union countries. And while, as I said, in the UK, we have a very scanty process that gives very little scrutiny, some of the other European countries have a much more real and meaningful process. And they will have to have a public debate in their own countries, and there's a chance that the deal could be blocked there.
Well, speaking of which, I mean, the House of Commons just voted to empower the UK Prime Minister with the ability to trigger a Brexit. So this government has repeatedly claimed that Brexit means reclaiming UK sovereignty, and yet this government seems eager to sign on to CETA, which will heavily erode the sovereignty of the people. So how do you explain this contradiction?
Yes. It's a strange contradiction. I mean, I like the rhetoric of quite a lot of politicians. There's a difference between what they say that they are in favour of and then what they actually vote for. We will be pushing quite hard as the discussions go on through the whole Brexit process for there to be changes to the way that we approach trade policy in the UK, and for the need for there to be much more democratic scrutiny, for the politicians to live up to what they said they were doing when they were campaigning for Brexit. If they were campaigning for more sovereignty for the UK Parliament, then they need to deliver that. They need to actually introduce processes whereby the UK Parliament does have to have a say in what trade deals the UK government starts looking at. Need to establish some basic principles for our trade policy, that our trade policy needs to be coherent with our human rights obligations, with our development objectives, with our environment commitments. And we need to have a process whereby there is actual parliamentary scrutiny of throughout trade negotiations and a real need for Parliament to give its agreement before trade deals come into effect.
Indeed, we've been speaking with Jean Blaylock. Jean is a policy officer at the Global Justice Now advocacy organization. She's been working for over a decade on international trade and food issues. We've been discussing the potential passage in the European Parliament of a brand new trade agreement. The acronym for it is CETA, and it's getting some scrutiny and some controversy because it's not really being fully debated at minimum by the UK Parliament and does not allow for a lot of public input. So, Jean, we appreciate your time and your expertise with us today.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for watching the Real News Network.